Tamara, thanks for joining me today on this More Than Indie interview. It's been a while that I've been not doing these, so I'm like very excited to be having this again.
It's good. It's going to be a chill chat, getting to know each other. I'm really looking forward.
Yeah. So we were talking a bit about like how I started More Than Indie, and one of the main purposes of the project is really kind of to zoom in on the personal journey of artists and try to kind of really have a nice heart-to-heart kind of back and forth conversation where we talk about the music but also about you, some personal experience that got you into your musical journey,
Yeah.
and we see where that takes us.
All right.
Yeah, so
It's gonna be really dark, but let's do it.
fine, we're both dressed in black. I think we're matching with
Oh
our
yeah, I always wear black. No, it's good. Get ready for some dark stuff. Let's do it.
So yeah, I mean, if you can like tell me a bit about you, how you got into your musical journey, where it all started.
Um, so basically music's always been there. I was more into performance arts when I was younger. I did that professionally. I used to do figure skating professionally. So I did a lot of things that always revolved around music as well. But I think everybody kind of experiences this at one point. It's just, you go to your bedroom and you try to find that gap in time when you're around so many family members to just be with yourself. And that was so sacred, and it was always very like, short in time, and it would be a small frame for me to create something really quickly, and I'm like, oh my god, I have to go, I get distracted, or I have to go do something. So it kind of started becoming like that for me. It's kind of finding room and space for myself.
mm,
So that's really how it started. And listening to your own voice, I think people are very uncomfortable with that till this day. If you go into like a studio, people are like, oh my god, is that how I sound? They're like, oh, it's weird. So I think learning to listen to my own voice is something that I acquired at a really young age.
mhm.
And all of a sudden, choir comes up and they're like, oh shoot, she can sing. So I'm like, okay.
How
So
young were you?
I was 9.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, I started figure skating when I was 4. I did that for Kuwait. I got invited to Junior Olympics and all of that, but then that didn't really sustain itself because, it's a really whole different field. If you have one injury, you're screwed. You got to move out of your country. It's like really hardcore training. I did that for a while, but then my family thought was the better option was to just live a normal life. So ended up going into music and theater and choir, and that's basically how I started my journey in high school, and then theaters in Kuwait, and then I went on and I studied abroad, and I specialized in drama and music. Yeah.
Nice. The performance is a big part, I think, of the music, whether it's active performance or maybe like embedded into your creation process.
I think it's a whole narrative, you
Mm,
know. I like that any form of sense that you decide to lead with will always kind of connect all the other senses all together. So it's really a narrative of storytelling, but properly storytelling in every single way.
would it be like I mean, I know like in storytelling, there's always this sequence, right? Like
Mm,
so you establish the characters maybe at first, and then you have like the rising, and then you have the
mm.
plot twist, and then you have okay, what
Yeah.
happens in the resolution. Do you would you say you like follow that, or it's like okay,
In
that's
in my music, you mean?
yeah,
Um, not necessarily. I think my mind doesn't really think that way. I think I do it intuitively and it flows intuitively. And then when I do take a step back while I'm working on it, I go, oh, there it is. I think it's the natural frame of the way it works. But mainly when I write, it's because there's this change of structure in my routine. Something breaks my routine.
yeah.
Something shifts and shakes it. So you have that normal narrative and then boop, something else happens. So I think that is a supernatural the way it takes its form. And naturally, I think this is how we kind of go up in these waves. Uh Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of artists always have these. It's one of two things. You either have like a batch of like lyrics here and there and some melodies that you've saved on your phone and
Yeah.
across the
Yeah.
years, especially I think you come in and you're like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna fix this and I'm gonna
Mhm.
make something out of this. Um,
Exactly.
I think from hearing you say from starting that journey at such a young age where you sit and you introspect and it's you time, probably 'cause there's a bunch of things, a lot of substance basically.
Mm. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I know. It's just like turmoil and turbulence cause all of this, it costs you, making something, and it costs you something in order for you to make something else. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what would be like the time where with your first release, like maybe you can tell me a bit more about like, okay, how you tap back into like that whole
You
memory.
know, it's interesting because now this is the third EP that's coming out, and a lot of my friends that are musicians, or just a lot of people, they're like, "Are you like embarrassed of like your first EP that you put out in general?" They're like, "Oh, I can't listen to mine." And I'm like, "No, not really." Because I don't mind seeing the way I've evolved musically. I think it's amazing. It's you when you're 18, you get this shitty tattoo, and you're like, oh God, and you still have it on your body, and you look at it and you're like, oh, how ridiculous. But people want to remove these tattoos, and I'm like, why? That's the whole point. That was the entire journey of your growth, whether you were mature when you did it, or your sound was mature, or not. I think it's totally okay. So I'm really happy right now where I am with this release. I've been working with my partner, who's also my producer, and this is our second EP that we put out. His name is Antonio Haj, very talented. And so we did our first EP. The second one was called Soft Glitch, and we were sonically getting to know each other. His skills were improving. I was retouching bass in my writing. So now seeing the shift of this second baby that we've created, I think it's really cool to look back on these things. Now
Yeah.
this took a lot of this one hit hard, and it took a little bit more time
Yeah.
in the entire process, because I had a very big I had a death in my family, someone that was really close to me, and I didn't deal with it properly. And then I had another death that was really big that happened shortly a few years after, and that was finally really shook me, where I had to write. I had to write. I had to write every single day. I had to write letters to these people every single day, because it's the only way I could stay sane. And he helped me stay sane with him. I think this is what partnerships is how you do.
Yeah.
And it was amazing to see how this project gave birth so differently than others. The intensity is different than others and than other projects. So it's a really beautiful thing to witness.
Yeah.
And I think that globally and everything that's been happening, we have been going through extreme turbulences. It's only normal that our inner worlds are really battling, the exterior. And so I think it's a topic that a lot of people can relate to as well. And you're growing as a person.
Yeah.
Real life is happening to you. And so I think that's why I really feel like this piece of work is finally really represents me. This feels like me. Even the sound that Antonio and I have been making before, I'd be like, how do you make this sound? Like, I'm like, I don't know how do you do this? Now I have an understanding it, because he's educated me with them. And so now I'd be like, this is what I feel like, and he gets it. And so the flow of it all together also has been really working out.
Heavy. I
Right.
think talking about like a death in the family is something that we share,
Mm.
and it's so interesting that I think dealing with grief, and that's
Mm.
something that it's so personal and so subjective that you never really have a linear process for it. And what I've experienced, and I lost my mother actually this summer, and it was very
I'm
painful, but it was
sorry.
also a very slow process because she
Yeah.
dealing with sickness for many years. So I actually experienced a lot of like anticipatory grief,
Yeah,
which
which
was
is
also very
hard.
difficult.
Which is, yeah, I'm
So
really sorry.
yeah, thank you. I'm also sorry for your loss.
Mhm. Thank you.
So that for me was a process because I was also writing, and there were times where, you really don't know what's going to happen. So I also found a lot of uh like, it was very cathartic to be able to put everything into words. And it didn't necessarily need to, like, sometimes it was just very abstract, sometimes it was very literal, sometimes it was very poetic, sometimes it was just a mess.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and yeah, I think also like the way that you don't really know what's going to happen, right? Like for you, you were saying that it's had, you had to experience two deaths in the family to be able to actually feel like, okay, this really needs to come out. Whereas for
yeah.
me, for example, my process was that it hurt so much building up until when it
Mm.
happened, it was like, oh, this thing happened. Like,
Yeah,
you know, oh, okay, wait, what now? And then it's like it just comes and hits in like massive waves, and then sometimes it's a no. Oh, I'm totally fine. And you're like, is it okay to be fine? Like, what does this mean? And how is this? So, um, speaking about your EP, I thought it was very, the musical treatment of the topic was very profound to listen to, because, you have like this depth and I mean, the way I experienced it again, that's my own very personal listening experience
oh,
of
it's
the
nice
night.
to hear.
It's like there are parts where it's just solemn but then soft, and it's just like, this liquid sound.
Mhm.
It's like it's deep, you don't know what's happening, but you can just let go and surrender and be like, this is just life, and that feels okay.
That's really nice to hear, really. You know, grief hits everyone differently, of course. And sometimes, you need, it might, if it happened to you before and then something else re-triggers it without knowing. Um, it's really, this is how I've been describing it to people, because it really comes in waves, because it's kind of this lingering illness that doesn't really leave you, and it hits you in the most random times, and you could be totally fine, and then all of a sudden something just feels heavy out of nowhere. It's really weird how it works in the body.
Yeah, it is.
And so I've been around it a lot since I was a kid. I just happened to be in the room. I know this is very dark. It's very dark. Like when I came out with this EP, people are like, "Oh, how are we gonna write about this? This is not easy, but it's okay. It's life, you know."
Yeah.
I started kind of picking up in a pattern of when you feel death that's coming near, with
Mm-hmm.
how the body goes through it, the sounds the body makes when they're there, when they leave, which is before their body kind of is not present anymore. And I realized that we have developed such an understanding towards when you're born and what you need to do during your life and the transformation you do as you're living, that we don't really have an education with the transformation of leaving and death, and what could happen or could not. And so I think the pain, other than coming from the trauma that you see, whether it's sudden or it takes time, I think most of the time just this slice of not knowing, that's it, and no education or information around it doesn't help you to transform from that situation. So I think the pain comes from not really having an education around the subject. And I think that's what really drove me to be like, okay, what is this? How does this work?
Yeah.
When you start to see patterns in the way the body responds and the way the body leaves, and I was really taken aback by hospital machinery, and the sounds that they make and the way they look and the signals, and that's where a sorry signal comes from. It's a sorry signal.
Mm.
And I was in the hospital rooms for quite some time, and I took my phone out and I recorded one of the sounds that it makes. And I told Antonio, I'm like, can we put this in the tracks? It's like, yeah, we can. I'm like, cool. And so you have like a kidney dialysis machine that's in the tracks. It's very subtle. People will never notice, but like these are like internal messages for us. But
Wow.
but so yeah, so the more education that I dove into around it, and the more it helped me kind of liberate my own soul, you know? So that's that's sorry signal. I know it's really hard, it's really dark, but I think
It's
uh
it's it's the most
yeah,
one of the most natural things that
yeah.
go
It's
through.
the things that people are very uncomfortable with. But so yeah, that's where the EP really gave birth.
You know, you talking about the sounds of the kidney machine, and I've, you know, as you're speaking, I'm reflecting on the moments where I was also, you know, confronted with death, whether
Mm,
it was firsthand or hearing about someone passing or whatever. And I remember that I was in school. Um, this was like middle school, you know, like middle to secondary. So it's also like your teenage, you're really starting to kind of understand your body and how you work.
yeah,
It's like it's this
yeah,
transitory age where
yeah.
a lot of things suddenly make sense and you understand
Mm,
the world.
mm,
um
yeah.
and I remember I was like walking into, there was one day where we were informed that a parent or a grandparent of people like our classmates had passed away. um and the next day, or like the I think, for example, like it was like the weekend, the Monday after the weekend, I just walk
Mm,
into school and I had my music on and I was listening to Roxette.
mm,
And it was one of the songs, I think it was Crash Boom Bang. And I see the guy just walking in the playground with like his hands in his pocket, his head is down, and he's just walking. And I saw him and it hit me so hard how he must have been feeling now. And then for years, every single time I would listen to that song, I would connect with that moment, you know, almost feeling his pain. And I had no idea, you know, I was just like, this
mm,
must be so hard.
mm,
So yeah, the way also that you kind of like your body just is like,
mm.
ah, what did I experience in this moment that I'm facing death in whichever way I am facing it? It's like, oh, okay, it sounded like this. I remember this. This was how it looked. So already you kind of register all the senses.
Anything can hit. It doesn't
Mm,
have to be necessarily death. You lose yourself very easily. This always happens.
yeah.
And it's the way you get better at navigating to get better again from anything, you know. That's experience. And so yeah, basically.
So for you, it's yeah, putting together an EP.
Yeah, so I'm happy that I have this channel to 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 get things out, you know. And once the work keeps me busy and it keeps me sane and it helps me process. And when it's done, I'm done.
Yeah,
I
because
make that, you know, it's like, okay, you have 5 minutes a day to cry. You put that setting, you only cry for 5 minutes. So for me, it's like, okay, you get this project done and you put it away, you know? And of course, yeah, so human beings, we function on structure. That's the way we work. We're constantly, you know, like Waiting for Godot, you know, I'm sure you know the play. Yeah, so that's the whole point, is that we only function on structure. We're constantly waiting for summer or winter to come, and we're constantly putting these next checkpoints and goals for ourselves. This is what parents tell you. They're like, what did you write for New Year's goals? You're like, ugh, like, why am I gonna do that? But actually it's brilliant, because that's the whole point. You work towards these checkpoints to get to what you want.
yeah,
And that's the only way you will survive. You cannot And this is something also, you cannot be a disorganized artist to make it in what you do, and also for your own mental state, or else you won't, or anybody, not just an artist, you won't be able to go through life without doing that. It's you have to go through that. So for me, I'm setting a goal through that, and then I get to maybe experience small feelings on stage or not, so yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of structure, framework, and creativity, yeah, I mean, I really remember when I started doing illustrations and I was like early teen, and it was like a mess completely. And then like into late teens, into my early 20s, it was always so interesting how I always put a basic framework. So I'm gonna be like, okay, I'm gonna draw a human head with hair, and then I start filling it in completely, like with free, like free art and all that flexibility. And then fast forward 10 years after, I did a wall mural like 3-4 years ago, and then my process had evolved so much where I just started with something very basic, and I'm like, wait, I need a concept. So then the framework even became that extra layer of creativity, which is I need like some proper concept, like an artistic concept, an expression.
Of course.
And that became the guiding light to the piece. And then in that, I kind of allowed myself the space to express. But then when I look at it, I'm very much able to walk people through the story in that piece of work.
Absolutely.
Which is so interesting in the creative process. And I think a lot of people they get stuck out of fear of, I can't achieve that, so I'm not even gonna start.
Yeah. I think you're saying quite valid points. In your youth, you're like, oh, let me just throw myself in something and just see where it takes me. And you're just like experimenting, and you're seeking this sort of spirituality in your work. And you think that the only way that you can actually achieve that is just by throwing yourself in the deep. And sometimes, yes, some things do surface, but that's not the way to go about it all the time. I think that you get really stuck. That's the way you get stuck. If you constantly rely in this, throw myself into the extreme, and that's how I get work, I think you're developing a really bad habit. And so I know a lot of people that think that's the way creativity works, but that you really actually stray away from anything creative. And it's like this weird misconception, right? It's like, it's like you have these romantic movies that are trying to educate you on love, which is not the right way it works. And I think there's really this sort of image of like, oh, that's how artists, make work. On the contrary, listen, I think, yes, you could throw yourself into these pools, but what's the entire point of that? It's you getting to know yourself. So why don't you get to know yourself on a sober state, for example, as well, where you can really test these structural exercises for you to get to know what your strengths and what your weaknesses are. And then, like, okay, I suffer from ADHD, and so I'm a functional ADHD person, but I've learned, I didn't know that I had it until recently, that I realized that I have developed a system for myself in order to be someone that can function with it. So I've already developed structure with that. And I've naturally done that with my writing or with my music. And you actually achieve more because you could constantly meet from that checkpoint that you've created and then start going from there. And a lot of writers do it with like imagery writing. You write something that you see and you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's just that constant flow. Is how do you find that flow? So yeah. So at the end of the day, I think touching back, structure is important. Knowing when to put the paintbrush down is very important as well. I think that is like something a lot of people struggle with as well.
Yeah.
Where that's it. This is where it's at. You have to know that it's enough, and this is the best I can make, or else you start to ruin the piece. You start to ruin So yeah.
I think one thing that I'd like to add to that is is that it really differs so much per person. And like, if you really look at independent artists, which again, you know, like going back to the theme of these interviews, is shedding light on independent artists and their own process and their own story and all of that. I think one thing that I really value is how much indie music or an indie process stays very true to your own process. And it's not like, it doesn't turn into this commercial process, or it doesn't turn
Mm.
into like you're doing it purely for someone else. You're still doing it for you, and then also considering the audience, also considering people who are listening. And then you kind of
Yeah.
find, okay, where do I stay true to myself in a way that also can, you know, fit into the needs of whoever
Mm.
I think will relate to me, without losing
Mm.
yourself in that process. And I think that's the thing, that's kind of like, once you figured out what works for you,
Mm. Mm.
as a way of working, you really thrive. Um,
Yeah. You have to have certainty in your method, you know? And one thing you were saying, which is so true, is that, listen, why are you doing what you do? For what reason are you doing what you do? Is it because you're seeking attention from the outside world that you're seeking? Is your talent being driven more on the outcome of what you want from others? You know what I mean? And at the end of the day, this is what I think, is that, okay, yes, you can make business decisions and be like, okay, you know what, I'm going to make this business decision, let's say, to sing in Arabic rather than English,
yeah.
even though my go-to is English. It would be better on my end to make it successfully and to get more coverage in the Arab world, to be to sing in Arabic, and that could work definitely. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long it could be sustained for. You know what I mean? If you're naturally already doing a business decision that is not something that is innate to you, um, I don't know how you can sustain that for too long. Does that make sense? Unless you're working with the right company and the right people and all of that. But
But still, with that, I
you
think
get
at
you
some
get these
point,
brief you get these brief like exposure and attention and coverage, and that's amazing for whoever does that. But then what? What's next? So I think it's important that with your craft, you're really doing it for you. And I think consistency in what you do is what gets you where you want. Consistency is everything. I think that's the key. So
so how do
yeah,
you stay consistent?
I don't think I have a choice. I I don't have a choice. I have to do this, or else I'll just go insane. I have to make music. I have to sing. Uh, I'm happy when I work.
Okay.
I'm happy when I work on this. When I'm not doing that, I'm constantly finding ways to come back to it.
Mm.
So
It's
yeah.
it's that natural pull you
Yeah.
were you were mentioning.
Just, you don't have a choice. It's not a phase, mom. It's not a phase. You know what I mean? God, mama, you want to do something more serious? لا. You know? I know. خلاص, it's there. بعدك ايه بعدني. So yeah. بعدك عم تغني؟ nice. So yeah.
Oh my God.
I'd love to see your illustrations, actually. I'd love to see your work. Yeah. We'll do
I'll
that
post
later. Yeah.
some. It's so interesting. Actually, it's Yalla. It's so funny that you say that. I have people who were like sometimes asking you like, no, كنت بترسمي صح? And then now you're like, I'm تعملي this music project. And I'm like,
Mm. Mm.
no, بس أنا لما كنت عم برسم, like, it's so funny because my friends would be like, it's so beautiful, but sometimes they would notice like how difficult for me it was. Like, there was a year where I took a time off of my day job to just focus on starting up as an illustrator.
Mm.
I put together a portfolio, I made a website, I was just creating more artworks, and I set up like this web shop where, like, okay, like Redbubble and Society 6, where you just upload your artworks, they produce it and everything. And friends
Amazing.
were supporting me. They were buying, like it could have worked,
Mm-hmm.
but I
Why
just
did? Yeah.
couldn't get myself to continue doing it. And my friend was like, your heart is not into it. And I would like collapse and know, how dare you say that to me? Like, how could
Mm-hmm.
you even say such a painful thing? And I'm like, I look back and was like, but it was the truth, because I want to do this. I want to do something related to music, just like I did, 10, 11 years ago. And I did it for 2.5 years. And the only
Mm-hmm.
reason it stopped was because, other priorities came into life. Um,
Of
and it's
course.
just
Of
resurfaced
of
now.
course. Yeah. You have to deal with life. You have to deal with inflation. You have to deal with that's the way it works, but doesn't mean you can't come back to it.
100%.
And I think having multiple mediums is a great thing. That's something, there are pros and cons to focusing on one thing and doing that only for the rest of your life. But there's a lot of benefits on you alternating between two things. So this is what I do. I take breaks from, like, when I had to go through this process and those things that happened to me, I couldn't give to. I teach Legree. It's a Legree fitness. Like, it's not Pilates, but it's similar to using the Megaformer. It's a machine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm into herbalism. I've done herbalism, and I basically treat women that suffer from polycystic ovarian syndrome, and I treat it through functional nutrition and herbalism.
Mm-hmm.
So things happen in your life. You get sick, you fall into depression, just things will always shake you, and you can't always commit to the art that you make, but you can commit to taking care of yourself in a different way.
Yeah. And
you
maybe
know
give back in a different way, or like express
Absolutely.
in a different way.
Absolutely. Giving back to your body, giving back to the community. Uh, if you don't take care of yourself in that way, then
Mm.
how could you give back to your craft? So it's good to alternate between different things. Doesn't mean you stop it. You just it's called power of the pause. Mm-hmm.
But I have one question for you, which is like, when it comes to being an artist, and
Yeah.
that you have, I mean, I'm a marketer, and I always like to ask this sort of question of, okay, personal branding as an artist,
Mm.
and then adding that layer of as an independent artist, you're not like signed to these like huge record labels which are like
No.
forcing you to do a marketing campaign in a certain way and all of that. So like,
Mm.
how do you experience personal branding as an artist? And have learnings? Do you have anything to share, any tips? I don't know, like, just curious about that.
Well, so it was just really innate. People are like, you should do a stage name. And I'm like, no. I've also been advised by, like, my first producer. He's done really well for himself. He's going big. His name is Wilma Archer. And he was telling me, he's like, Tamara, just go with your name. Trust me. You go with something that you don't like when you're younger and you're like, oh God, I regret it. And some things
Yeah.
you can't go wrong with your name. So from then on, I don't know. What do you see when you look at this? As you see it as a brand? It's interesting for me because what do you see? What do you see that's branded?
um I see that you are at the forefront of it, which is one
Mm,
one way, right? There are a
mm,
lot of artists who are also putting, just, I don't know, like, conceptual album arts,
mm, mm,
consistently, right? Like
mm,
every EP or
mm,
every album has an element, and it's the same, and it progresses, or it's
mm.
just, I don't know,
Mm.
extremely branded towards the album itself or the concept or
Yeah.
the story. Whereas I think for you, it also starts with the name, right? Like, it is
Mm.
your name out there. You don't have some
Yeah.
magical fairy dust
Yeah.
name.
I listen, I love I went to drum school. I love acting. I love acting. I love acting for camera. I love everything that goes all around performance.
Yeah, that,
Um
that shows. So like, I mean, when
yeah.
you told me at the first, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm into performance. And I'm like, oh, makes sense, of
I
course.
love it. I find it really intriguing to find you're staring at a lens and you need to get through to that person that you don't know who you're staring at. And I love it. It's interesting to try to find someone from way across. So Yeah, I don't know. It's just
So
really
interesting
intriguing.
that you see it this way, because I almost for me like it's literally the other way around because you are like the lens is on you.
Yeah, I don't see it that way. That's funny. I didn't think about it like that. No, for me, it's just when you stare into a portrait or a painting, like, or look at the Mona Lisa. Why are people so taken by the Mona Lisa? It's just because what is that person what's the word? Emanating, not emanating, transferring to you.
Yeah.
And I love that. I know. Oh my God, today actually, like super random. You know, dogs, you know why dogs stare at you so much? Do you know why? They're trying to decode your emotions. I find
Oh.
that's why they stare so much.
Mm.
Um, it's really interesting. It's like their atoms are like they're called mirroring molecules or something like that. They're trying to mirror and see what you're feeling. So this is kind of what I try to ignite through the work that I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And you have different characters.
Yeah. Like with
Yeah.
Nomad, because I checked.
Nomad.
I was like browsing the website. I think it's always interesting. I like to see how people brand their websites
Mm.
versus socials.
I
It's
mean, what you
extremely
say
different.
coming from a designer perspective. So
It is
just
extremely different. Yeah, I'm a marketer. I can't help it.
yeah, don't tell me. We can have an off camera chat as well. Totally consult me. Tell me what to do. I don't know if
No,
I'm
no,
doing it
it's just
right.
it's so interesting because like you go on the website and it's extremely structured. It's neat. You're like, this is this video and this is the story of that video. And you're like, oh, this is like, oh, so beautiful, so so beautifully articulated, you know. Whereas Instagram is just like, here's me, here's a bunch of shows, here's a
Yeah,
bunch of demos, and
yeah. Yeah. I listen, like I know that there is branding, but I came out as my first video for dust bathing. I came out with an animation, and my friend's like, "What are you doing? You should come out with your face." And I'm like, "No," and it did so well. It did so well, and I came out with that. That was the first thing I ever put out. Um, so, and I do an animation for every single EP.
mm,
It's important for me because yeah, I do like to do these projects, but it's not only about that. I want people to also kind of just browse YouTube and they're like, oh my God, this is beautiful. What is this artwork? And also really working with, for me, creating these videos is working with these extremely talented um, artists all around the world, and especially local, and finding them through their work. They
yeah,
direct, they tell me what to do. So it's like, how do I find you? So it's kind of like really reflecting also what they're doing. So yeah, I hope that's articulated. Yeah.
yeah. I think I really think I find it important that you also, I mean, find people to make things with.
Yeah, love
It's as
that.
simple. It's like as simple as that. Like put
Yeah.
aside all the fancy creativity and all
Mm.
like, oh, we're making art together, and it's like, you know what? I like what you're doing. We have very
Yeah.
different talents, but if we put them together, we can make something even more cool or different.
Yeah.
Like it's you're getting a unique and like a unique human and another unique human, and you're like mashing this and making something
Mm. Mm.
very special.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and it's a joint project. It's not like, I don't know if you go through that where you sit with the client and the client's like, this is what I want, just do it. No, it's not how it works for me. This
Oh,
is
yeah,
our project together, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
So you have great questions, by the way.
Thank you.
It's one of the most fun interviews I've had.
Seriously,
Genuinely.
I discovered I'm a journalist apparently.
Nah, naturally. Good at asking questions.
Thank
Mm.
you. Cool. No further questions at the moment.
Awesome.
I
All
could
right,
talk
cool.
for hours if I don't.
Yeah, man. We started at 8:30. We did 2 hours. Thank you so much, by the way. It was really nice.
Yeah, me too.
I hope you liked what we discussed. I hope it resonated with you as well. And if you ever want to talk, I'm here
Same.
anytime.
I say the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah. I will send you the EP, the whole thing. I'll do that. We're coming out with Overfire, which is the next one in like next month or so. That's the next
Yeah,
thing that we're gonna
November,
do.
correct.
Yeah. And yeah.
Nice.
Thank
Very exciting stuff.
you. And
Absolutely.
thank you so much for your time. It
Lovely.
was it was awesome. It was so natural. You're really warm and wonderful, and keep doing this. You
Thank
have a talent. Yeah.
you too. Really looking forward to listening to the whole EP.
Thank you.